Okay, good morning, everybody. So my name is Major Steve Anning. After joining the Army in 2001, I'm now a reservist and a PhD candidate at Southampton University, and I've been working at the modern slavery human trafficking space for about 3 years now. So today I'm representing a British Army research project in which we seek to develop methodologies to substantiate the risk of modern slavery in conflict. And I think for militaries, this is very much an under-researched area, and I think a recurring theme has been hidden populations, and I think we have a lot of hidden populations there. In this presentation, I'm going to develop, from what Harry said, it's almost as if we planned the panel, and talk about data governance, which I never thought I would do at a United Nations conference. So in this I'm going to talk about data trust, and this is an idea which seeks to facilitate the sharing of data in a trustworthy manner among a community of trusted agents, such as ourselves. So in many ways, it feels like we're pulling through some of the threads from this panel so far. While I don't want to go into specifics, it's probably true to say we're presently having problems around trust around the use of data. So the purpose of data trust, therefore, is to facilitate the sharing of data in a more trustworthy manner. I've only strictly got 8 minutes, so I'll briefly introduce the idea, and you'll see references on the slides, and then my Twitter handle is there. I'll post those on Twitter afterwards so you can see the references should you want to do more reading. But before we begin, to give a focus to the presentation, there's quite a lot of technical jargon in this field, particularly around sort of data governance. So to be clear, for us, when referring to data subjects, I'm focusing on the perpetrators and the survivors of trafficking. And of course, certainly in the cases of forced criminality, a person can be both. And it's the idea of and it's with our common purpose to bring perpetrators to justice and the safeguarding of survivors. So next slide, please. And next one. So Project Solbay. So we're named after HMS Solbay, which is one of the first Royal Navy ships to begin anti-slavery operations following abolition. Our Project Solbay is a research partnership funded by the Defence and Security Accelerator, which is part of the Defence and Science Technology Labs in the UK, and that's essentially the UK's version of DARPA. Within the partnership is the Army and a commercial company called Trilateral Research. So our report is due in May, and we look to publish our methodology as open source in a journal. And I'll post some of our findings on Twitter for those who are interested, and I'll gladly take questions in Q&A. The project is a partnership, and we seek to employ AI to develop the analysis at scale. And of course, successful analysis will depend on having trusted data from a variety of sources, as is true for the many of the technologies we've seen in the hothouses in the last 24 hours. And the key word I've mentioned so far is partnership. And if we look around the room, we can see the people who be part of equivalent partnerships to enable the technologies. And it's no understatement to say we are a diverse bunch of people. And I mean diverse in the sense of our expectations of how data is handled, both from our cultural expectations and our legal obligations, particularly relative to which country we're from. So sharing data between us is subject to our differing expectations, but essential if we are to be successful. So to be successful, we need to have a set of common expectations for how we govern the handling of data for our purpose of bringing perpetrators to justice and the safeguarding of survivors. So next slide, please. So accordingly, the idea of data trusts was introduced in a 2017 report produced by Professor Dame Wendy Hall and Jerome Vicente to tackle this issue. Their report was about developing the AI industry in the UK, and I'm taking a lot of their ideas and applying it to trafficking. So their idea of a data trust was inspired by the legal equivalence in which a trustee holds a property for the benefit of a beneficiary. And while the idea is inspired by the legal model, for various reasons, they don't propose to recreate the same legal frameworks, but it's more about how people give their data to a trusted group of agents and for it to be handled in a beneficial way. So in the words of Hall and Vicente, a data trust is a set of relationships underpinned by a repeatable framework, compliant with stakeholders' obligations to share data in a fair and equitable way. Next slide, please. So since publication of Hall's and Vicente's report, work to develop the data trust idea has been underway at the UK's Open Data Institute, the ODI. So founded by colleagues of Dame Wendy, Professors Sir Tim Berners-Lee and Nigel Shadbolt, who I'm sure you'll all know well. The ODI's purpose is to inspire people to innovate with data, particularly through the use of open data, very much taking similar ideas to what Harry's been doing. And for the purpose of tackling slavery, we might consider what data sets we might be able to publish and where we might be able to publish them. But as we've already discussed the anonymisation of that data, in the anonymisation of it, we can lose some of the value in that data. So we need to be able to share data at greater risk. So the ODI defines a data trust as a legal structure that provides independent third-party stewardship of data. And to develop their findings, they have recently announced a launch of 2 pilots in the UK around the sharing of government data for smarter cities. So to learn more about data trusts, this is certainly the go-to organisation in the UK. Next slide, please. And to develop the idea further, I'd like to point you towards a recent white paper written by Dr. Kieran O'Hara of Southampton University's Web Science Institute, whose director is Dame Wendy, and where I'm a PhD student. So in his paper, Dr. Kieran comments that data trusts constrain behaviours in many of the ways that have been described, relevant to the respective laws and the data standards, but also comments that the benefit of doing so is to liberate data, since if members of a trust are seen as trustworthy, they are more likely to get improved access to data. And that is particularly true of sharing data with government organisations such as law enforcement, and in my case, particularly the military. There is quite reasonably a lot of scepticism around doing that, so we need to do that in a trusted manner, and government agencies need to earn the trust of organisations who develop their own data and made probably personal investment in doing so. So data trusts aren't necessarily about data storage. Instead, they provide a portal to a catalogue of data for sharing between trust members, but data owners retain storage of their data sets. And in that way, it's about getting access to those indirect data sets that have been referred to a number of times, and perhaps unusual data sets in which we might find hidden insights. And it's also not just about privacy and security, all those are, of course, 2 important components. Also, agreeing with the ODI's definition I've already mentioned, Dr. Kieran describes a data trust as working within the law for the provision of agreed ethics, a common architecture and strong governance for trustworthy data processing. And I'll just go over those 3 components now. So by ethics, we mean that the members of the trust have the competency to understand the data, know how to use it ethically, and are using methodologies that have been agreed by the trust members as best practice. And this is perhaps the unethical use of data, where this system hasn't been in place, that has created the decline in trust that I mentioned at the start of this presentation. By architectural, we mean having the necessary components in place to create a portal to the various data sets available to trust members. And we've seen many of the architectural components mentioned already, such as the catalogue. And in addition to that are the various tools and visualizations that we've seen in the last 24 hours in the hothouses, and all of which is required to be managed by a governance board. So finally, by governance, we mean having the necessary pre-agreed procedures for handling data, that we have a forum for making policy decisions about data, about our risk approach and our risk for sharing data, and also what happens when something goes wrong. So what does this mean for us in this room? So in the time I've been working on anti-slavery, I've come to realise this, more than any other issue, is one to be solved by multi-agency and international working, for which common expectations are required to enable effective collaboration. So for our data, we have a duty towards protecting the privacy of survivors and providing evidence of high standards of integrity to convict the perpetrators of this crime. So we are an international community with differing expectations of how to handle data and differing ideas of best practice. Yet within the room, we have the enormous potential to tackle modern slavery with our multi-agency and international expertise, along with the leading technologies that we've seen. So without data trusts, we would still have the technologies we need, but we in this room will likely be siloed around particular technologies. So having data trusts in place would therefore provide a platform for us to collaborate as a community in a trustworthy manner to best serve the needs of tackling this insidious crime. So where we started with the idea of a data trust and data governance, perhaps where we finish is with a means to operationalise this community here today around our common ideas of trustworthy practices. Thank you very much.